All right, Alham. So I haven't heard about Blue Engine in a while, so I'm definitely excited to hear what kind of updates we have going on. So I'll hand it over to you.
Hello, everybody. Hello over to the YouTube too. This is Alham here. I've been in the Gamedev Meetup a few times, but it's been almost half a year since I haven't talked here. So I'm excited to share a lot of news about this because I've been going through some stuff in real life, like exams and stuff, so I wasn't able to keep up with the meetups. But let's get started about the Blue Engine. What is Blue Engine? Blue Engine is a graphics engine, first of all. The aim is to be easy, portable, and extendable. So, what do I mean by this? By easy, I mean that you won't have to like pull your hair while working on it, so to speak. And it should be easier to use, just like every other engine in other language. But the definitely the inspiration for the API and the easiness was the Raylib, because I was really impressed by how easy it was and how we didn't have anything similar to it in Rust at the time. So I've started working on this. By portable, I mean it should work on any platform that Rust supports. Right now, the platform support is still under work. We have mobile support, but uh, tests are needed because I don't have almost all devices in hand. But generally speaking, it works on all devices that Rust supports and the web GPU supports. Because we use web GPU standard, wherever the web GPU supports, we also support it. The code is also portable, so there's very little platform specific code there. And we also have the extendable portion of the engine where you should be able to extend the engine however you want. So it shouldn't take your hands and like force you into a specific area, which is also a big part of what I'm working on right now because we have a lot of things for it to be able to like fully work without needing a lot of modification on the source code. But that's all for the future, but and also for now. But let's get started on what happened on the Blue Engine since half a year ago. All right, so we have a lot of main changes on the engine. First of all, I want to note out that we have a lot of bug fixes done because there was quite a few users of the engine, so the bug reports were very low. So we had to get a lot of bugs that popped up just recent and then fix them. And to make things easier and to track things out, I've made a workflow. I'll share the links to all of them at the end of the meetup. But we now have a workflow basically, which let me just go over each one of them. And I made a slide for each one of them. I've made a workflow on GitHub to make it easier to track things out, like what to do next and what's in the progress, and made milestones on the engine. We didn't have it in the past because it's quite a bit of work to plan things out and have them specifically like dated, labeled, and things like that. But now we do. We also the workflow make it easier to track the progress of and the status of the engine, basically. Um, it makes it easier to track what bugs to fix first and the priorities too. But yeah, basically that's now what exists in the engine. Next up is the plugin system, which was quite a bit of work because it took me around 6 designs to make this work because it was pretty hard to make a design that works with the philosophy of the engine to be extendable and to be easy to use, and also not make it hard because Rust is not an easy language to make dynamic systems on it due to all the restrictions that exist in the language, which is really good. And the last design that I came up with was I was really happy with it, just saying, because whatever came to my mind at first was not as good as the last one, and it's all thanks to the language. I'm just saying that because the language is really good. The last design that I came up was definitely a lot better than the first one, which is something that really pushes a lot of people off when developing in Rust because they think the language is super hard, so they try to fight with the language. But if you actually go with it and actually listen to what the language want and the philosophies that it have, it's a really good thing. And your designs will actually come up a lot better than what you had in mind at first. And for now, the plugin system supports two two functions, which is comes with a trait. When you apply the trait, the function two functions basically run um, by the plugin system. The first one is, as you see, is update events, which basically is before any frame or anything. It just takes the raw events of the system and feeds it to this function. It also feeds the window, the objects, the other things that the engine have, but the main focus is for the events because in this stage there is like no checks for if it's a frame or anything. It's just raw events as soon as they come. This would be good for if you have a lot of different things like third-party software for if you want to implement, for example, GUIs or cameras or fly cameras, so to speak, and things like that, which need real-time data for the events. And the second one is the update function, which runs each frame. Uh, by the frame, I mean each frame that runs in the update loop. For those who are not familiar, the Blue Engine have something called an update loop, which is similar to a game loop, where it runs each frame and then checks for if everything else has finished in the system and if the frame is ready to be used. And we'll not go into internals right now, but it's basically each frame is run with the update function if you have plugins. These are done in backgrounds, so the users don't see these APIs themselves, but these can be used very much to make almost anything that I've come across, any plugins that I've made so far. So if there's something that it doesn't work with, feel free to open an issue and I'll redesign the API system. Uh, we can see an example of this plugin system by showing EGUI plugin. The code that you see right now is the user-facing side of the EGUI plugin. And I tried to make it as easy as possible, and there are still some designs to go on it and some iterations to make. For example, the way that it works right now is you get a context by starting basically the EGUI plugin. So these are the initialization functions for the plugin because it needs to start some things up with the EGUI before it being able to draw. And the second one is you push the plugin as a box to the engine plugins. And that's pretty much it for this initialization of a plugin. You don't have to do anything else. These are done outside of the loop and inside the loop to get the plugin. For example, if you want to do something specific with the plugin that are outside of, for example, the two update loops, you can get it, downcast it to the structure that is your plugin, and that's it. Your plugin is now available inside the update loop. You can do whatever you want with it. I'll link two EGUI examples of how it looks like in the full at the end of the meetup. Now let's move on to what have been done with EGUI plugin that we have built with the engine. The most recent news about it is that it supports the end window draws. What that basically means is normally in the Blue Engine you can draw things up with the objects and things like that. The object system is basically making it easier to pack shaders and textures and things like that and manipulate them during the lifetime of your program. But now you can, thanks to the plugin system, you can now use it inside a window of EGUI. So basically you can take whatever graphic you have and now you can plug it into EGUI and have the EGUI handle it. So that's another example of how the plugin system is very flexible and can let you do things that are like normally really hard to think about, but by design it works really good, and however shape you, or form you want to build it. The another thing that have come in the engine is utilities crate. What it is basically in the past we had a lot of things crammed inside the engine's crate. So for example, sorry, okay. In the past we had like cameras, like fly camera, lighting system, animation, and things like that being inside the engine itself, the engine crate. And it's been getting pretty big, the code base for it. So I was thinking of moving it outside of the engine, which is the Blue Engine utilities. I forgot an E on the engine. But basically, it's a secondary crate where if you want to have utilities with the engine or miscellaneous things, for example, animation system or different types of camera, lighting system, things like that, now they're on a separate crate, and you can just use a flag or example or choose any part of it that you want, basically. Instead of having everything crammed up inside the engine, they're separate. So the engine code base can stay clean without needing to use a lot of flags and things like that, basically. There are some things that haven't been there yet. Basically, the object system isn't there yet. The camera itself isn't there yet. But so far we have moved on the animation, fly camera, light, and things like that. Speaking of animation, we have an animation system now. It's not really a big thing because the animation is really linear, linear manipulation of the animation. So it's not really complex animation graphs or things like that. But so far you can have linearly make keyframes and manipulate objects in the scene with the animation system. It still needs a lot of works to do, and it's also a plugin, but it works so far. And I'm thinking of adding a lot of features to it as the time goes. But for now, it exists now. And speaking of that, we have I've been working a lot to clean up the API because the API was a bit complex at the start, and a lot of people were stuck with how things were done before. So to make it still extendable, the API that user faces are conventional keywords and things like that. For example, on creating a new instance of the engine, you before you had to pass in Windows settings and things like that. Now they're under new config, basically, and the new option just chooses the default options itself. It might be a bit inconvenient for some users, but this is to make it a bit cleaner to use. And we also have like separate functions like triangle, and before they were passing on the objects themselves um, as return, but now they don't. And before they also had they also needed the engine itself to be passed as argument, but now it's just specific parts that it uses. Therefore, you can use the functions inside the update loop and things like that without having to deal with lifetimes or borrow checks. The triangle function, how basically the whole definition of the triangle function is on the right side. You can see it's just calling a new object, passing on your name, vertices, indices, and that's pretty much it. And we've also we're working on a type map, but I've decided to not use it because it gave pretty big performance hits on the engine. For those who do not know, type maps basically make it easier to choose your own um, type arguments, basically for your update loop or whatever functions that you use. So how it works is basically if you only want, for example, objects or renderer, but you do not want anything else like camera plugins and stuff, you can just type in the type of the renderer or object, and during the runtime the engine would pass it on to you directly, just that, and not pass on everything else that comes with the update loop. It is a good for convenience, makes it cleaner and just use whatever you need, but the performance hit is pretty big. So for things like a graphics engine that's supposed to be small and run everywhere, it didn't really make much sense because the place that it was going to be used on was the update loop, which the difference between using this and the update loop was just like a semicolon, not semicolon, underscore. So it didn't really make much sense. But the typemap crate is still up. Um, I will put a link to it. So if you have a project or a crate that you want to use this type system, it'll be easier to use that, or just look at the code and implement it yourself accordingly. These are these types of systems are pretty available nowadays on Rust. For example, Bivy have it. I think Actix also have it. But yeah, it didn't work with us. And as far as I know, basically, if you have different opinions on it, I'm up for listening about them and redesigning the API however works with the users. And that was a quick rundown of all the updates we had on the Blue Engine since half a year ago. A lot more things have happened, but I have not really had time to push all of the change logs here because a lot of things change. But overall, on the grand scheme of things, those were a few updates on the engine that have happened so far. Thanks for now.
Awesome. So that's super cool. I think one thing that I've kind of learned as I design like the micro jam engine and stuff like that is just like a lot more about how you want to structure something so that it's like ergonomic for people and usable and stuff like that. And so I learned a lot because I'd never tried something like this before. But I'm curious, like on your journey of like going through and implementing the like work on the Blue Engine, like what were some of like the biggest things that you learned from the process?
The biggest things that I've learned is basically I've not used traits very much, which are really good. Traits in the Rust programming language is really powerful if you use it correctly because they're really in depth and they support basically a lot of magical things that are impossible in our language and make it cleaner too. That was the first thing that I've come across that was like really life changing with the engine. And the second thing that I've come across is like people make a lot of mistakes while using your API without knowing. A lot of things that are like natural to you, like this makes sense for me that I've designed it, but for other users that are less experienced and doesn't know much about how your own system works, for them it's very complex. For example, the initialization of the engine, it had an object, the Windows settings basically, where you could add the settings for a window, for example, width and height and title, stuff like that. That doesn't seem a lot to you, but for someone who is newcomer to Rust, which we have a lot in the Blue Engine community, that is a big thing for them to like understand how it works and how to use them at first. Like, what do I put in this structure? Do I have to fill everything up, or do I not? What if I want the default? How the default work? Things like that. And if you change it to just a config function alternative for it, that will like simplify a lot of issues that comes up in your chats. But yeah,
Mhm.
just use names and APIs that are make sense for the user and specifically for them, and use whatever thing that your language supports best for you. For example, traits was in my case.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so true. I think for myself as well, as I was going through it, like sort of just how you start thinking about stuff from a step back, where it's like you have to make functionality works a lot across a lot of different things, and like you really start to dive into traits, and then you start to ask questions. You're like, okay, I do need to share this piece of data across like this or this functionality or whatever. And is there a way I can do this with traits, or is there a pattern that I haven't known about before that now makes sense to me because I'm trying to do this? And so that experience for me has also been like a lot of fun to do. And so I definitely agree.
It is. It is. It is. It's a lot of fun journey to go through all of that. It opens your eyes to a big level.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Alham. I hope we
Thank you
do
for
catch
having
up
me.
in a few months on more updates.
We will.
Perfect.
See
And
ya.
we will be Cheers. We'll be back in just a few minutes or just a few seconds with Blade.